vehicle miles traveled, and the amount of time we spend getting to different land use by different means of getting there. While the analysis gets a little complex, statistically speaking, the conclusions of the article in the packet by Severo and Duncan on which mix of land uses reduces vehicle miles traveled more is meant to demonstrate that the proximity of uses is a critical issue to land use planning and the health of the environment. Vehicle miles traveled translates into air pollution. Vehicle hours traveled translates into time that might be better spent on productive activities with our families or in our communities, or doing our hobbies, whatever we love to do. Land use is related to the preservation of open space and conservation of natural resources. What uses you put in one place is an opportunity cost. You can't put some other use there. Where you put the users of land use, you determine what seismic, flooding, or other hazards they may be subject to. Housing is another important issue in land use. It's also an important social equity issue. Where we put it can also be an environmental issue and a community character and economic development issue as well. Fundamentally, the pattern of land use is about where to put the growth that will occur in the population and employment over the horizon of the plan, 2030. To the degree that the pattern of land use allowed by the plan is logic-driven, there can be greater connectivity for the community and a stronger local economy, less environmental pollution, and perhaps even greater social equity. So the results could lead to greater sustainability and perhaps, as I suggested in the staff report, even perhaps greater happiness. If we review the trends and consider some of the concepts for dealing with the trends tonight, then we'll be armed with the concepts for the review of the rest of the land use element. Overall, it may be just some tweaking here and there to the existing plan to improve it, to give it greater sustainability. The work that's been done by the Council and the Commission and the Open Space and Ecology Committee and the public has already contributed to improvements in the plan in that direction. It's important to remember we're just at the beginning of the land use element, and that it will be somewhat of an iterative process. That as we move into the circulation element and we get the environmental review to see what the implications of the land use plan are in terms of environmental impacts, there still may be some adjusting to do later on down in the process. The next meeting will start to go through the 13 sub-areas, starting with central Brisbane and moving through the sub-areas that have potential. Some will have more potential for development than others of the 13 sub-areas. The staff and the Commission will be making recommendations on certain parcels as we go through the sub-areas that have potential for certain uses, and the recommendations will be related to the planning concepts that we talk about tonight. The staff and the Planning Commission have some recommendations for changes, additions, deletions, relocations to the existing policies and program language, as well as the addition of several new policies and programs that we would like the Council to consider tonight. Most are related to the planning concepts discussed in the staff report, and they are shown in red in the policy and program matrix worksheet that you got with your packet.
That's attachment J?
Correct. Yes. The larger sheet, the large sheet. Ultimately, the Council will have to decide what priority to give these issues. And that may be somewhat a different priority than in the 1994 plan. Before the Council begins its review, we'd just like to do a quick PowerPoint presentation on where we left off. The last Council was talking about the plan and the concepts that are in the staff report. The land use element, as I said in the staff report, is related to the future growth of the city. The Council wanted to see a plan horizon out a little further than 10 years this time, so we're looking at 2030 We're looking at population and employment projections from the Association Bay Area Governments, projections 2007. We're looking at the regional housing needs assessment numbers for the period 07 to 014. And if the plan is adopted by next year, it would be 22 years to 2030. We're also looking, though, at housing from the point of view of out to 2030 as well, not just the 7-year period of the next housing element update. I've shown you this slide before. It's just a encapsulation of the population trends through the years. Actually covers 60 years, but with the city's population growing to 5,400 by the planned horizon of 2030. Population growth estimates in ABAG, that's San Mateo County, San Francisco City and County, and Brisbane. Just a slide to give you a comparison out there in 2030, how much San Mateo County has grown versus San Francisco City and County and Brisbane. Employment trends, there's an issue as well. In 2030, 17,610 jobs, which is something on the order of twice the current level of jobs, somewhere between 205 and 2010 on that chart. The trends are, it's just a percentage breakdown of those same figures. Age distribution of the population as of the 2000 census. See that 45 through 54-year-old cohort is moving through. I guess that reflects the baby boom. Household size. This becomes a little bit important further on in the presentation. The average persons per household is 2.2. You'd find that it would be different for smaller, for rental housing versus homeowners. But roughly, according to the census, 2.2 persons per household. While the total population has increased, average household size has actually declined. The average household size of the owner-occupied units, as I was saying, is different than renter-occupied. We've talked about the housing element, one of the 7 mandated elements as well. The new housing element will be for the 7-year period starting this year through 2014. And we've talked in the past about the regional housing needs process of developing those numbers. Tentative numbers were a 250,000 units for the estimated for the whole Bay Area by the state, California. San Mateo County share was 7.36 or 18,400 units, so that's what's being spread around. The cities right now in the process, the number that's being discussed that would be Brisbane's share is 469 units over that 7-year period. As I mentioned in the staff report, the good news about that is it gets set to 0 every 7 years. So despite that it was 425 in the last 7 years and the city saw 60 units produced, that isn't added on top of the next projection. They go back to 0 and start with the next 7-year period, so it's kind of 0 based. These numbers to keep in mind: current population is about middle of this year, 3,900, estimated 5,400 in the plan horizon. That's a total of 1,500 population growth over the plan horizon. If you were to take that household size figure and divide it into the 1,500, you would get 681 units to house the additional population increment of 1,500 people over the 22 years. Jobs, again, estimated to grow. One of the things we will be dealing with each sub-area is in the land use category. Each land use category has standards for population density or building intensity, and that ultimately determines the what they call the build-out of each sub-area or the build-out of the whole land use element, which will be evaluated in the environmental review. Very similar process to the specific plan review. Table 5 in the general plan I attached to the staff report. I give you an example of one of the columns in that Table 5 on density and intensity standards of land use. For example, Sierra Point, the land use designation is Sierra Point, commercial retail office, and Bayfront. The Bayfront's 100% open space. Population density figure that you're required to have in your plan for each land use density and intensity standard, 1.66 to 3.22 employees per 1,000 square feet, or 1.65 hotel rooms. And the unit per acre or the floor area ratio at Sierra Point is 4.8. That's the higher end of floor area ratio that's in this plan. And that's just another example with Central Brisbane, for instance, having more designations: residential, neighborhood commercial, retail, office, and open space, and the population density associated with those in the plan. Next week, when we get to Central Brisbane, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're really not talking about the build-out tonight, other than to note that that's the explanation for why we have floor area ratios and population standards in the plan. The survey, just a reminder, the survey questionnaire we did a year and a half ago or so, retaining Public Resources Institute at San Francisco State University to do the analysis, basically a replay of the 92 survey with some greater depth to it in terms of under each of the major questions, asking some more information to ferret out things like what does community character mean. Overall, the respondents expressed pride with the city's uniqueness and desire to retain the small town atmosphere. Different responses somewhat between the Ridge, Northeast Ridge area and Central Brisbane. That's the only dichotomy we really had in there. With the newer residents, if that reflects the Northeast Ridge, certainly is favoring more retail and service options, more likely to support various growth and development options, but still many more areas of agreement between the two, the older part of the community and the newer. That's where we kind of left off when we initially started with the update. Current status is the council has completed a comprehensive review of these chapters: Parks and Rec, Community Character and Economic Development, Open Space, Health and Safety, Conservation. We've, in effect, finished phase 1. For a handy way to look at it is the other elements tend to be the background elements. They're not as dynamic as the land use element. We're into phase 2 now, looking at the sub areas, starting with Central Brisbane, moving on to Bayshore Boulevard. There's 4 sub areas: north, south, east, west. Bayshore Boulevard, and then we'll be looking at the circulation and noise element in the fall. And this is where that kind of iterative process is, that there will be some adjustments not only between the sub areas, but between the circulation and the land use, perhaps when the council looks at the circulation capacity to handle the land use. We had some reading materials in the packet about smart growth, new urbanism, mixed use, complete streets, and the article I mentioned earlier by Severo and Duncan regarding vehicle miles traveled, and how an important part to play the mix of land uses and the pattern of land uses and the intensity and the density that you provide for in the parcels of land in the city can reduce vehicle miles traveled, which is a net benefit to the environment and probably everyone's personal sanity, to the extent we spend more time in our social life than in our automobiles. And that's not to say that automobiles can't be fun. Strategies in response to an unsustainable growth crisis. This was basically the idea of the article that was in there on smart growth by Jonathan Barrett. He used to work for the San Francisco City Planning Department many years ago as a professor at on the East Coast at University of Pennsylvania, I think now. He expresses the concern about the growth crisis. He shows the 9 metropolitan areas in the United States, the Bay Area included, and the projected population growth by the U.S. Census. Between 100 million expansion in the population of the United States over the next 42 years. Most of the growth will occur in those 9 multi-city regions across the country. Here's the Bay Area in that picture. Population now about 10,600,000, going to 21.5. He talks about dumb growth, low-density urban sprawl, which is our typical pattern, and it's really facilitated by long-established patterns of funding, mortgages and highways and tax subsidies, some of which certainly are beneficial to the homeowners and the drivers. The danger he sees is that we won't wake up to the true dimensions of this doubling of the population until 15 or 20 years from now, when we may have wasted a lot of opportunities and advantages to fix mistakes in this pattern of land use that we all are familiar with, called suburban sprawl. He offers smart growth as moving away from that typical low-density pattern, that it has three elements to it: conserving natural resources, encouraging compact development, creating walkable neighborhoods. Another concept in the toolkit of dealing with the arrangement of uses on the land is new urbanism. It's concerned with both the pieces and the whole. I think the three essays by three of the main contributors to this land use philosophy or approach of new urbanism basically is to return to the way things were before the end of World War II and the explosion in freeway building and automobiles and vehicle miles traveled. It's defined by its diversity, pedestrian scale, public space, and structure of bounded neighborhoods. I think one of the key things in here about new urbanism is that it's a comprehensive way to look at that growth issue. The entire region should be designed according to the same urban principles, whether it's neighborhoods should be structured by public space. A lot of emphasis here on the public space, the public realm. That's why when you have some of these consultants come and talk to you about urban design, Friedman Tung-Bottomley, Fred Kent, it's a lot about getting back to recognizing what we kind of lost touch with in the suburban growth explosion of the importance of public spaces, the town center, the community park. And new urbanism is an emphasis that public space, I love this quote by Calthorpe, public space should be formative rather than residual. It isn't something that's just secondary to the development project. It's key, it's central to making good places. Civic and private domain should form a complementary hierarchy. Brisbane, as you'll note in your general plan, has a lot of these concepts already built into it. So this is preaching to the choir to some extent, I understand. But it helps to remind you and remind ourselves that there is a good way of going about making this pattern of land use work better for society and for the environment. And civic and private domains, complementary hierarchy, that's expressed in this issue that we've talked about before, and I'm sure we'll talk about some more, the open space, open area dichotomy. I think I've come to realize that it's a piece of wisdom to think about open areas as not just another part of open space, but to look at them more closely into what is private development giving you in the way when they're going to invite public in to shop, to dine, to be entertained. Are they giving you plazas and paseos and places for people to congregate and socialize and create a better economic life in the community? So I think these are all key concepts of new urbanism, and it kind of goes from the general to the specific, from the neighborhood, calls out districts, some corridors. You think of places around the city, neighborhoods. You think of districts like Sierra Point. You think of office districts. Think of corridors like Bayshore Boulevard. Why shouldn't Bayshore Boulevard be a grand boulevard? Why does it have to, will it, over the next 20, 25 years, maintain its same character, or are there things that can be done to make it a more pedestrian-friendly, bicycle-friendly opportunity for enjoyment, rather than just merely carrying vehicles? Down to the block level, and then the decisions that the Planning Commission makes at the regular meetings on every building. It's a piece of the fabric in the city that can either honor the public realm or turn its back on it, or something lesser in between. Andres Duaney is famous for Seaside, Florida, where he tried to design a new urbanist town from scratch, so to speak. The fundamental organizing elements in Duaney's mind of new urbanism is the block and the district and the corridor, and neighborhoods are urbanized areas with a balance of human activity. The neighborhood in new urbanism, it's a focus and a limit, and helps create the social identity of the community. The center is a necessity. The center is always a public space. In the new urbanist mind, that's why you keep hearing this public realm, public realm, public realm. Harkens back to the New England town square and the town green. Exceptions are justified when you can't have a center because you got something like a shoreline or a long transportation corridor. There's exceptions to the rules. The edges are important to the character. The edges define the land use, the village as opposed to the farm. This is the optimal size of about a quarter mile from the center to the edge of a neighborhood. This is the idea of walkable neighborhoods. You'll see this brought up by Diet Bhatia on the specific plan for the Baylands. How far are we walking to get to a major transportation connection or not? Is there a balance and mix of activities of dwelling, shopping, working, schooling? Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule where, because of other constraints or other opportunities, you don't mix it quite the same. But the basic formula, the principles behind new urbanism and creating good spaces, it seems to be a sound framework. Recognizing that districts, and this is where you might not have that same 100% mix of categories, where you have a district, maybe an office district, maybe Sierra Point reminds you of that now. It's kind of exclusively an office, more of an office district. You could have theater districts, tourist districts, and the uses that would likely be mixed in those districts with the main dominant use of the district. The organization of districts parallels that of neighborhood. And again, this pattern kind of repeats itself. It's almost molecular. It's almost like a DNA of cities that they're identifying here. The importance of corridors and the street network, helping to define the character of the community. It's not just the buildings, it's the street network as well. It's not the haphazard, the corridor shouldn't be like Bayshore Boulevard. It shouldn't be a haphazard residual space. It should be an element, an urban element characterized by its visible continuity with the rest of the community, what the land uses that front on Bayshore Boulevard look like, what might be done to make it more of an urban experience. This is the last of the three. It's just a quote from Polyzoides, one of the new urbanists. It's realized by deliberate assembly of streets, blocks, and buildings, and single buildings incrementally introduced into the blocks to find the character of the urban space, or urban areas, open areas. Again, this hierarchy from streets, pattern, configuration, and details. Street patterns is an important element of it. The hierarchy of the streets, from the small neighborhood streets to the large arterials like Bayshore. The configuration of the streets is important. We spent some time, and we'll talk to the council a little bit about when we get to central Brisbane. What is characteristic of great streets around the world? We look at some of the resources on that. On the width to the height of the buildings, the width of the street and the sidewalks, and the height of the buildings, how they define the space, how street trees contribute to the look of the street. Certainly, Visitation Avenue has because of the street trees that have been added, it creates a sense of pedestrian scale. And so there's a lot of aspects of the street that are more important than we might think at first blush. Shifts in the scale with the street locations to be accomplished by the design of landscape, the edges of buildings on the sidewalk, and other vertical elements to define that common room space of the outdoors. The governing principles of street details here for the new urbanists includes everything from the minimizing the radii to slow cars at the intersections to allow easy crossing for pedestrians, raised or pavements and so forth, treatments, properly designed curbs and sidewalks. Those kind of the elements that create a great street and a great place to meet your neighbor and socialize. And so then they drill it down really to the size, configuration, the street walls, the parking and the landscape. These all a part of what makes a great experience in the urban place or a small town. Some of the principles on block size here. You could look at this in the specific plan of the Baylands and ask yourself, what are those dimensions of those blocks that they want to create in the specific plan? Are they pedestrian friendly? Are they short enough? They create a rhythm and an interest, or do you feel like you're exhausted by the time you've walked half the block? How each block, whether each block has lobbies or major ground floor things. Some downtowns that you think about, as well as the cities here in Brisbane, you think about what is the characteristic, how those buildings address the streets. There's some design guidelines for Visitation Avenue that the city adopted several years ago now that give some direction about how buildings should address the corner, items like that. The Commission has gone over this a lot with the Central Brisbane because, of course, it includes the core downtown and the shopping center. Parking's an important element of it as well. Again, we won't be getting into that until we take a look at a sub-area starting next week. But it's important to think about this as an article by Donald Shoup about Carmel. And it's amazing that they have practically no driveway cuts in the downtown. And it creates a different feel for the pedestrian in downtown when they don't have to be concerned about cross traffic, pulling in and out of driveways and parking lots and so forth. So some of those concepts can be used to make a better downtown. Again, I mentioned the trees earlier. Right down to the building level. That's what the Planning Commission does at its regular meetings, looking at those details about the building, its configuration, its placement relative to buildings next to it, and so forth. There's really two kinds of buildings that the new urbanists like to focus on, and if you think about it, it makes sense. The fabrics of the buildings conform to the street and the block, and there's monumental buildings, and there's fabric buildings, which is another building in the fabric, and then there's monumental buildings like this building. And on Visitation, the opportunity when the city does involve itself in building new structures like a library, very important opportunity to create a statement that all subsequent development will look to as a key as to what the expectations are of the Commission and the Council of what kind of quality should be put into developing their private development buildings. And this all applies to the Baylands. Monumental buildings are free from other constraints. They don't have that. The same rules don't necessarily apply to a monumental building because you're making a statement about religion or the civic realm, the public realm. So what's the secret? What's the secret of a great place? Well, there's probably more than one way to do it. I'm sure the council has many thoughts about this based on these concepts that we've tried to present in the staff report and to equip you with ideas to think about as we go through the sub-areas and build up the land use plan. One of the things I wanted to mention is as we go, the land use element, we're kind of doing another process from the process that we've used with the other elements, which are kind of the foundation elements of the informational system that feed into the land use element. The land use element is really, because it's it's so comprehensive, the whole city, it's broken down into those 13 sub-areas. So we're going to go through each of the 13 sub-areas, some more than others, because like Owl and Buckeye Canyon, there's no development, it's open space, so there's no potential there, so we don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time. So there'll be a key half dozen or so of the 13 sub-areas that have development potential. Some of them, as you know, are in play as we speak with environmental reviews in process, be it the Baylands or the Sierra Point Biotech Campus and the hotel, proposed hotel at Sierra Point, and certainly downtown, central Brisbane, and the shopping area, and some of the adjacent properties on Bayshore have some development potential, and staff will be making some. Staff and the Planning Commission will be making some recommendations on some changes there. We made some changes in the general policies that are in the land use plan for tonight's discussion. They're in the matrix, as we mentioned at the beginning of the staff presentation. I just submit this slide as an example of a monumental building this is the Santa Barbara Courthouse, Spanish colonial revival. It's gone through a few adaptations in time over the last 125 years, but it's an example of a great monumental building. What I particularly like about it is the sunken gardens behind it. And when you think about the discussions we've had and will be having on Sierra Point, and in terms of great public spaces, I think this is an example of a great public space and a great monumental building. And I think that's about it on the staff presentation.
Any questions?
I have a couple questions. We're not dealing with the housing issue tonight, right? According to the staff report, but you did bring up the ABAG projections, and those projections apply to every city in the whole Bay Area, right?
All 9 counties and how many?
In all cities. And at some point, we're going to reach a pinnacle. I mean, all the cities. I mean, I think we're closer there than not being closer there as a Bay Area. At what point has there been thought to that? I mean, say 2030 comes around and Brisbane has this total build out of plan, not just in housing but everything. What, they keep saying every year to give you, or every 7 years give you the same housing projections, which become unrealistic, or what happens?
Well, I mean, essentially, the population growth is made up of internal population growth and immigration into the country. Immigration into the country is largely a federal issue, although the states are deal with the problems, and then the state, in projecting that population down to the local level, figures out a methodology for distributing it, as you're suggesting. I think, without saying that there's really not an answer short of, I suppose, not zero population growth, but short of that, as long as there is growth, I think what the issue then becomes is, if you assume some level of growth, where is the best place to put it? How should you share it? Some places, as you know, have better capacity for absorption, but even in those places, I think, as Jonathan Barnett's Smart Growth article suggests, from a broad sense across the country, those 9 metropolitan areas, including the Bay areas, are projected to grow for this much. I don't have any answer as to, why it should or should not, but what you should do with whatever share of it you end up getting or taking, you can do something about in terms of where it's located.
So every city is assigned this housing projection, right? And every city is assigned projections for low, very, very low, low, moderate income housing, right?
Correct. Of that 469 that's projected, our share, or Brisbane's share, for the 7 years of 07 to 14, that is further broken down by the very low, low, and moderate, as you're suggesting. When that process is finished, we'll be coming back to the council and saying, here's what the outcome of this process that you agreed to by resolution last August to participate in this kind of nuanced version of it where San Mateo County, instead of just getting your number from ABAG,
Right.
dealing with ABAG, we're dealing at San Mateo County level with the 20 cities in the county.
Right. I'd like to get a copy of ABAG projections for San Mateo County, of all San Mateo County, and of what their projections are. I'm really curious about the housing elements in Hillsborough, Atherton, Woodside, and Portola Valley, especially on low-income housing.
I've asked for that information a couple of times, actually.
Yeah, I would like to get that because, to me, I think this is hypothetical, that these numbers are hypothetical and they're not realistic. And it's like you're being projected towards these things that filter down to the state and they're not real. And at some point, we're going to max out in building. And you're still going to be throwing numbers down from whoever the people in power are at the time.
I think we're all agreed that an action item should be the delivery of that data.
Yes. And I'm assuming that next week we're going to be addressing this. Is it next week we're going to be looking at some of the sub areas, or?
Beginning next Monday night, the first sub-area we look at is Central Brisbane. We have some statistical analysis of the acreage, the number of parcels, what it's currently zoned at.
Will you give us the ABAG numbers in that context?
Yes, and I gave you the general ABAG numbers tonight in the chart of population growth.
I appreciate that, and I think what I'm hearing is let's get specific.
Yeah.
Well, through the chair, we're still in the process as well. That's the point. We're going to TAC meetings, we're going to policy meetings. And
I appreciate that, but this is our number. I think we'd all like to see what everybody else's number is as well, and I would like to see what, if any, enforcement mechanisms ABAG has with respect to those numbers.
Can I address
Please.
that momentarily? So I actually take part in that regional housing needs assessment process that's going on in the county right now for this cycle of the housing needs assignment. And as the planning director mentioned, that the actual assignment of numbers to each jurisdiction have not been made yet. We're still working through it. It looks like it's going to be a certain percentage of 18,400 units for the county, but as I recall, it wasn't until sometime this month in May that the state was going to actually tell the county how many units the county was going to get to divide up. So the number's not firm yet. And the other thing is, I have had an interest in finding out what these other jurisdictions you mentioned have actually built as far as low and moderate income housing over the last RENA cycles. Because the interesting thing about the housing assessment or the housing assignment is you don't actually have to build those houses.
Right.
And so jurisdictions like Brisbane, where we have built houses, it seems like the more houses you do build, the more you try to cooperate with the state and provide housing for your people, the more you get penalized by getting more houses assigned to you to build in the future. And that's one of the interesting things about the process. And if I could follow on with a question also to staff, the growth, the assignment of growth numbers both in business growth and in residential growth, is that based in any way upon a jurisdiction's general plan?
Through the chair, yes, Councilmember Barnes. I believe, I don't know all the nuances and subtleties of it at ABAG, but they do projections every 2 years they put out a new book on projections. There was a projections 2005. There's a projections 2007. Basically, they're getting those employment figures by looking at the general plan, the amount of land that's allocated to trade, commercial, and the number of employees, similar to our intensity and intensity standards of number of employees per 1,000 square feet of whatever the non-residential type use is, trade, commercial, warehouses, offices, things like that, hotel rooms. So yeah, it is based on all the jurisdictions and ABAG's general plans, and they've probably done some nuanced tweaking as to what that, that means when they build it up into the projections for 2007.
So they also look at the housing element and determine how many housing units a jurisdiction could potentially build. Is that also true?
Well, they would look at they would probably look at the amount of land that's devoted to housing and the densities that correspond to that amount of land.
And so I guess the reason I'm asking that is somewhere in here in the staff report, I think there was a recommendation that Brisbane actually plan for more than its RHNA allotment in order to accommodate any further allotments in the next RHNA cycle or something, or between now and 2030. And my concern with that is that the more housing or the more land we zone as permissible for housing development, the more the state is going to look at that and say, oh, they've already zoned that land for housing. We expect them to grow that much. Therefore, they have to plan for further growth on top of that. And I'm concerned about getting penalized trying to meet the housing demand as defined by the state, trying to meet that and specify that in our general plan or go past that in our general plan and then have that feedback into the state's assessment of further growth. And
right.
I think that I don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. and that seems to be kind of the crux that we're dealing with.
There seems to be a theme here.
Yeah. But also, Bill, if you can get the answer that, what happens if we, and this may not be an answerable question, but at some point when cities do reach their pinnacle of growth, what happens? I mean, with projections and all that. I mean, does it just stop and say, okay, we're out, check us off the list?
Through the chair, it is a nuanced process because over time, buildings that were maybe built 75 years ago for single-family homes or lower density or even a different class of property like manufacturing might be, and we'll see as we go through the sub areas, is it possible to take land out of one designation, non-residential, and put it in a residential designation? So, you're right about, and what I was trying to do in the staff report is just kind of put some bookends there of numbers and thoughts about relationship, but I wasn't trying to venture to say what I thought was appropriate because the ideal measuring thing is the jobs housing balance argument. If everything was 1.0, we'd have this perfect harmony. But the reality is that in every community across the topography of geography, there's different constraints and circumstances. So that ideal is just kind of a guidepost, but some communities may be better at providing land for jobs and others for housing. And so that there can be, to the degree that you're looking at it from a regional down to a local level, and you can associate uses within those quarter-mile distances that you can promote, the same kind of effect of mixing growth and reducing vehicle miles traveled. That's a good thing, and it's another way to do it.
Well, that regional thing that you're talking about is exactly what we're faced with. I mean, with Lenore out at Candlestick and Daly City with the Cow Palace site, right? And the Baylands. So, I mean...
Si, have your 2 cents.
Thank you. First, to the city manager, and that's a very comprehensive report you and Bill prepared. Thank you. Staff report. Bill, during your presentation, you mentioned that if you don't complete your quota, then you're zeroed out and you don't get credit for what you had, but you just go on. I'm curious about Yeah, so why should I do anything? The next one, I'll just get zeroed out and I'll just go on. There's got to be a penalty. And what is that penalty? And how would that affect me if I'm penalized? That's the thing that I need clarified too.
I'll let the city attorney chime in here too, as to some of the planning law involved. Basically, the general plan, as expressed in the planning law, is requiring all these elements so that you take into consideration open space, conservation, land use, and so forth. And in land use and housing, there, as you may remember in the past, the discussion about the consistency, the necessary consistency between the different elements of the plan. And that's, the city attorney can mention more about that than I, but the plan itself has to be internally consistent, and each element has to be internally consistent. In other words, the demographic information has to square with the land use statistics, and it has to, kind of make rational sense of if somebody was reviewing it, that you don't, and that you don't have, when it comes to land use and circulation, that you don't have land uses which in their build out would generate traffic trips that can't be handled by your road capacity, things like that. So there needs to be an internal and external consistency between and within the elements in the general plan, and that's part of the state law that kind of packages it. There's play there in how you address that, but you can be challenged for not addressing it properly, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I would add, I'd preface my comments by saying Brisbane now has a housing element that has been certified and approved by the state. There are numerous communities that do not, including some of the ones you may have mentioned. One of the risks you run if you haven't had your housing element approved by the state, and that approval means that you have established a program to provide the housing to meet the quotas that have been allocated to the city. The argument can be made that you do not have an adequate housing element, and as Bill said, all of the elements of the general plan have to be internally consistent. So if you have one element that is not valid, that might put into question the validity of the entire general plan. And there have been lawsuits commenced by housing advocates who have attempted to basically shut down all development on the grounds that the city does not have a valid general plan because the housing element has not been certified by the state. There are many court decisions dealing with this issue all over the place, and it's a very complex issue in terms of how the courts have addressed it. But I guess one point is that even if you have an allocation, doesn't mean you do it all at once. That allocation is supposed to be met over the expected life of the general plan, and the courts have recognized that. So it's not like you have to immediately put in all that housing. And then some cities simply take the risk of saying, well, we cannot meet the allocation, and here are a number of reasons why. And we think the state is simply wrong because we do not have a sufficient number of sites, we do not have the capacity to construct the number of units that the state has allocated to us. And you get into all sorts of arguments like that, and like Bill has mentioned, we don't have the allocation yet. We don't know to what extent we may have a problem, but at least we are in the position right now of having a certified housing element. So and we're looking prospectively to the future in terms of what units are allocated to Brisbane.
And for what period of time is that certification good?
Today. 2009, I believe, yeah.
If I could add.
Yeah, sure.
I guess a couple comments. One is that staff's analysis of this at this point is that we don't think we're going to have that much difficulty in putting together the next housing element based on our previous housing element and how much we've actually built out. The second thing is that you may recall there have been various efforts in the state legislature to do just what Councilman Bologov suggested, and that is to start having a punitive system in this state for cities that do not have housing elements that are approved. And to tie those into such things as sales tax and road taxes and various other revenue sources that are critical for our operations. So I think it's imperative that cities in the state act responsibly and are seen as act responsibly by the state legislature. Otherwise, we're inviting our own problem. We're inviting our own situation, as Councilman Bulgakoff suggested. And I certainly hope we don't get to that point. We have a system right now that does respect local control and does respect local decision making. And I think we should take actions that will support that.
Thank you.
Seppi?
Yes. I also serve on ABAG on dealing with regional housing issues. San Mateo County was one of the very few counties that decided not to go with the ABAG and do all the cities among themselves to come up with this regional allocations and what they want to have. There were a lot of discussions about what the state might do, and the seriousness of that was emphasized tremendously because there were cities in Marin County and Oakland were saying that what could they do? And they were very restrict about that.
So what was the answer?
About the answer? That there is going to be, it's not, right now it's not fixed exactly what the state is going to do, but there is definitely ramifications on that.
When I asked this question of an ABAG representative at one of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Policy Advisory Committee meetings, it didn't sound like the state was necessarily going to be the first one to come up with punitive actions. Her thought was that maybe MTC would first be the agency that would withhold transportation funding, that kind of thing. Evidently there's discussion about that. So it's the regional agencies also trying to enforce the state's will, that like ABAG and MTC, where we might actually see some punitive actions first.
That's, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's, and I think to answer the mayor's question, I think that, the answer is that local communities act responsibly in trying to deal with this housing element. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one for us, and for some communities, I imagine it's even more difficult.
Mm-hmm. In the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Policy Advisory Committee, which includes every jurisdiction in San Mateo County, there may be only one or two jurisdictions that are comfortable with even building houses. Nobody likes their numbers, nobody. And I think places like Belmont are considering actually not buying into the whole thing from the last meeting that I was at. So,
Wow.
Who knows how it'll shake out, but it's a common problem. A problem we have in common, I should say. But still, going back to my earlier point, I think in the staff report it did call out that maybe we should include more housing beyond, or identify locations for housing beyond our RHNA allocation. I still am concerned about that. To me, that leads to further higher expectations.
I think we collectively need to get a real thorough understanding of the formula and how it works, so that we don't inadvertently put ourselves in a situation where we penalized ourselves. I agree.
Perhaps at some point we could have a short staff report that specifically addresses that single question.
It doesn't sound like a subject that lends itself to a short, but I certainly understand your point. We'll try to make it as succinct as possible.
Now, am I assuming correctly that what we're supposed to do with the rest of this meeting is go through attachment J?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Shall we do it page by page as we have before?
Yes, sir. Page by page.
Do you have any comments on the first page?
Mr. Chair, if I just suggest too, on the right-hand side under the column notes is what staff is recommending. If there's nothing there, then the policies, we're not making any recommendation, any change. For instance, in the case of the first two, they're in kind of a lighter blue ink, and it says under notes, relocate to sub-area policies. Those two policies, those first two policies, talk about specific areas, in this case, central Brisbane or the quarry. of the Baylands. So we're recommending that those policies be put in their sub-area place rather than here.
And what I'll suggest is that unless you hear differently, why don't you assume that those recommendations are accepted? And we'll talk about the one or two areas where you may hear differently.
Thank you.
So nothing on the first page? On page 2, any comments?
15.2. I just
I'm
wanted-
shocked that you were going to start on 15.2, but please go ahead.
When you see emphasize attractive building and site design, I don't have a problem so much with the paragraph, but attractive is kind of subjective, you know.
Yeah, I had written down de gustibus non disputandum est.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, I
So
mean,
facto.
attractive, you know,
Which
brick's
means there's
attractive to
no-
me, but it's not, so can we
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
come up with a different wording, I guess. I'm sure that I know what they mean, but, you know, at the same time, you know, it's kind of
Through the chair, would
emphasized.
Emphasize attractive building and site design, crossed that out and started with during. During design review of all public and private development, give careful attention to building scale, mass, placement, etc.
Anyone else have any questions on this one?
Yeah,
Please, Si.
I thought we've religiously, no, that's a bad term. I thought we've always stayed away from design review. We didn't want to get involved in design reviews. And
Through
this
the
thing
chair,
is fraught with
that's
design
correct
review. Now, what are
on
we
the
talking
residential.
We do on commercial.
Huh?
We do on commercial.
This language does not make it clear that design review is not meant to apply to residential, or at least single-family residential. And I want to make sure that when it comes back, it does not lump the two together. Does that
Thank you,
satisfy
sir.
your...
Absolutely, sir.
I agree with taking that first phrase out, Mike.
Yeah. Any other questions on 15.2, Michael?
I was thinking that it would be nice to include how the building relates to others in proximity and impacts public open space and areas in that policy 15.2.
Did you write that down, and can you give it
Yes,
to
I
him
did.
later?
Sure.
So we have that clear. Anything else on 15.2? How about 15.3?
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
I had the same general issue that Councilman Conway mentioned on the first one about the word attractive. In policy 15.3, it says all parking structures should reflect high-quality architectural design that fits in with the design of adjacent buildings. And who's to decide that it fits in? Who's to decide that it's high quality? So I had crossed those out. And then I also crossed out where appropriate, so that it would read all parking structures should incorporate ground floor retail. And I was thinking that going even further would be good, defining some minimum parameter for how much ground floor retail, and I just pulled 25% out of the air. But it could just be some ground floor retail. I'm fine with that. Because I think that's what we want to activate those spaces. And then, as far as the top floor of the parking structure, it says the top floors of parking structures should be landscaped or utilize alternative methods, i.e. trellis structures, to break up large expenses of parking. And I crossed out to break up large expenses of parking, so that and included new language so that it would read, the top floor of parking structures shall include 25% vegetation or alternative methods, the trellis structures, period.
25% of what?
25%
Area.
of the area. I wrote over here in the margin some minimum 25% of the area of the top. And also, I was going to throw out there for discussion, do we want to say that all parking garages should have a green roof?
Well, you get into 2 points of consideration. One, should all parking structures have a roof, which necessarily means you're talking about more than 2 stories. And if you dedicate the top floor to green, then you are of necessity talking about 1 floor retail, 1 floor parking, then you got to have a top floor to make green. Do we want to be talking about in residential Brisbane, I mean in the area downtown, do you want to be talking about 3-story parking structures? I'm not sure that there'd be a lot of community support for that.
I'm not sure is this, we're not talking specifically about downtown Brisbane.
No,
We're talking
but
parking structure.
But if we're talking about policies that are applicable to commercial areas, either it's going to be applicable to the commercial area on visitation or it's not.
Maybe it needs to be broken up into some areas.
It would be very appropriate to break it up. Like what I'd be willing to talk about at the Baylands is quite different from what I'd be willing to talk about downtown here.
Right.
And I think we should clarify that. I see heads nodding.
Very true.
I agree.
So point taken?
So we need to bust this up into sub-areas when it comes out to it. Maybe the NCRO parking structure for downtown Brisbane and Baylands.
I would just remind the council that landscaping requirements are usually in the zoning regulations, which implement the general plan, and we don't necessarily have to have the general plan to have the detail of the zoning ordinance. So, you know, if you want to put it in the general plan, that's fine, but something like percentage of area devoted to landscaping is typically a zoning regulation.
Well, speaking for myself, I don't particularly care whether it's in the general plan or in the zoning regulations, but here in front of what we've been given, it's talked about. Now, if it shouldn't be here, if it should be somewhere else, fine.
I don't think the draft has any percentages. I think that's Hal's point.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, I guess trying to get the concept down too, you know, at the same time to where it's conveyed, you know, because at some point when we get to zoning part is, you know, we might have a total different council and planning commission and everything else, and you don't want to get it lost in translation.
So a point for further clarity.
Yeah.
Through the chair.
Theoretically possible that you will have, you might have other treatments on the top floor of a garage, such as solar panels potentially. I know the one company or the one project that Bill and I met with a couple weeks ago, they had looked at solar and decided that the economics of it didn't work for the top floor of a garage, but they were looking at some sort of treatment to soften the visual impact, so it would be some sort of landscaping. Now, if you made them do it entirely landscaping, I think probably what you would see is they'd come back at you and say, okay, but we need an extra floor,
yeah.
which you may or may not, want depending on where it's at. So, what I think, if I don't know, try here, I think you're trying to get at something that where there would be an encouragement to soften the physical appearance of the top of these buildings.
Right.
I know that discussion came up in terms of the Baylands of not looking down at a bunch of types of things you normally see at the tops of buildings.
That certainly reflects my concern.
We can work on that.
I see heads nodding. Move on to 15.4. Help me out, please. What is a paseo?
The only thing I
Paseo
had
is
was
a
newspaper-
mid-block,
Oh.
a mid-block pedestrian walkway through the middle of the block instead of going around the block. There's paseos through the middle of the block. Sometimes, I don't know how better to explain. It's kind of like an interior patio, public space.
You learn a word every time.
Well, just because
You'd probably find one in San Antonio, Texas, or Santa Barbara, a place that you'd see them more frequently associated with Hispanic architecture. But the terminology has become now common to provide a paseo, meaning a pedestrian patio space.
Okay. Any other questions on 15.4?
I don't have just a personal preference. I never found a line of newspaper vending machines particularly attractive anywhere, but
Through the chair, I think the Planning Commission had a lot of discussion on some of the details of the streetscape, and that the difference between putting, just yellow vending machines and, say, putting them in a structure in which 3 or 4 are gathered together and covered so they don't look so mismatched and mishappened, I think is where that came from.
May I?
Please.
In regards to vending machines, there are places like Boston. They have come up with vending machines for recycling, that people go and just drop their bottles or cans, and right there they get their money back. So this vending machine could include recycling, and they're very good looking and very easily accessible for people, and they've been very successful in recycling in that area.
So you want to add recycling machines in there?
When Sai was talking about he's not comfortable with vending machines, I was just trying to elaborate on what could vending machines include.
Yeah, these don't mean it's specific, but you can.
Right.
that's just a personal
Right.
experience I've had with.
To vend is to sell.
Yeah.
Typically, a vending machine means they're selling something to you
Not to reuse.
rather than buying something from you.
So did you want to put that in there?
If we're going to have, it's something that I think it would be good to have that,
Just as an example.
right?
Okay.
If we want to encourage people to recycle.
Yes. Are we through with this page?
I had
Please.
two more items, actually. One on 15.4, encourage the incorporation of well-designed pedestrian amenities. What do we mean by well-designed?
You mean it's totally subjective?
What?
Depends on what the Planning Commission thinks. Or the Council on Appeal.
Yeah, which means that nobody knows what it means.
It fits into the maybe development.
Maybe we should drop well-designed.
Or just define, or just be specific with what we mean by well-designed. I just don't know what it means. Is it, really hard concrete, or I just don't. It doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't convey any information.
One of the things I think that it implies, one of the things we're trying to do here is to provide some policy coverage for design guidelines in the general plan. So we have a little bit more leverage when it comes to development in the development review to have a policy in the general plan that backs it up. But I think well-designed means compatible with, for instance, one of the things the Planning Commission would look at is if you were putting a number of newspaper vending machines, or you were providing any kind of pedestrian amenity, that the style of the amenity matched the building that you were doing it
And
with.
that's my concern. So that's
Maybe we can say that, compatibly designed.
Perhaps, rather than arguing over this wording, perhaps we ought to have Bill and Hal talk about what an appropriate legally enforceable clause might say along these lines.
I would prefer, if we're going to have design standards, to actually just refer to the design standards in this element. Say have these design, require that these features meet the design standards, done. I mean, because if that's what we're trying to do, if we're trying to put something in general plan that gives teeth to our design standards, let's just say so.
Do we have something to refer to?
I don't think we do
Hasn't
yet.
been yet.
No.
Been developed
but we put it in here because we expect the design standards to be developed, right? Is that the idea?
You do have design standards on Cedar Point.
Well, we have design standards for downtown, Visitation Avenue, as well as how the storefront should look and so forth. Those have been adopted several years ago.
Well, then can we refer to them
since
here?
the general plan.
Can we just refer to the design standards in the general plan then?
But I suspect those, whatever those design standards are, doesn't address newspaper act.
Not on visitation.
One of the programs under that the policy is to, program 15.4A, is periodically review the adequacy of design guidelines established for various districts.
Right, that does not mean that we require those design guidelines to be followed. I mean, that's what policy 15.4 should do.
Policy 15.4 is expressing in the general plan a desire for the guidelines to be implemented, and what they address. So when we go through the design guidelines for Visitation Avenue in the future, we will see whether it includes these things, and this policy will, if the council cares to adopt it or change it or delete it. But if they care to adopt it then it'll serve as direction on what the guidelines should cover that they may or may not cover right now. So I think that's the idea here.
I think there's two different things going on. I think one, that there's this list of things that we want to see incorporated, pedestrian amenities, public improvements, such as, and that lists these things. And then the other thing is that we want these things to be compatible with the design criteria that we are going to establish or we have established.
And those are two separate ideas.
Right. And to me, the well-designed seems to refer more to the design criteria, but it seems to me the policy is really talking about, let's include paseos, plazas, fountains, and public seating. Let's have these pedestrian scale amenities in our developments or in our projects. So
if you were to eliminate well-designed and just said encourage the incorporation of pedestrian amenities and public improvements such as but not limited to, as it says.
But then I think you'd like to come back to the question of whatever it is, that it be according to some design standard.
Which gives you teeth to your design criteria in the general
So
plan.
then it should be required.
We're out.
Yeah.
So it should be.
Now, my thought is now that with this freelance editing, staff needs to put its head back together and redraft.
Just a note, it should be required then. If it goes to a specific design, then it shouldn't just be encouraged, it should be required. And I think that's your point, Michael.
Well, if there are going to be design standards,
Yeah,
then what's the point of having them to encourage?
exactly.
Perhaps, Mr. Through the Chair, perhaps it's really their design guidelines. They're not design standards, and it's not quite the same as a standard. Guidelines provide guidance to the Planning Commission as to what the expectation is, because they've been vetted with the public and the City Council. When they are reviewing design, they go by those guidelines. But it isn't the same as a zoning standard that you shall be set back 10 feet or you shall include 10% of landscape. It's a more a general thing to orient design, but it's not a hard standard. And this just gives those design guidelines a little bit more policy. If somebody were to come to the council or the commission and not want to abide by those guidelines, and the council wanted them to, the fact that there was a policy in the general plan that we could say, well, we can't find your projects consistent with the general plan, because it says you should respect the guidelines.
Right.
So,
This does not say respect the guidelines. This says well-designed. And so all I'm
Right.
asking for is that...
and that's what I got from your comments,
great.
that you wanted, and the mayor wanted to change, reworded such that it refers to the guidelines.
And in the interest of moving us forward, staff will come back on this point. We can go on to page 3.
No? Can
Nope.
we stay here for a moment longer? I had...
If we have to.
Well, when I was reading policy 13, 14, and 15, I started, for some reason, thinking about Fred Kent. And these are programs that talk about integrating the physical, social, environmental, and financial elements of the community for the benefit of current and future residents, establish a mix of uses with a diversified economic base, adopt development standards which protect and enhance the quality of life in Brisbane. And I was thinking about Fred Kent and his rule of 10, where we're trying to activate public spaces. And it seems like we're trying to do that in our projects. We're talking about retail in the garage on Sierra Point. We're talking about trying to maybe do something more with the downtown, the area surrounding the park. And so Fred Kent, when he came to town, he had this, you want to have 10 reasons to go to a place. And these 10 reasons to go there bring people in for each of those 10 reasons, so you get more people coming in. So, for instance, with the community park, you have the gazebo, you have the picnic tables, the children's playground, the field for activities, you have the native planting area behind the restrooms, you have the restrooms, and you have the sidewalk circuit that people walk around the entire park. So that's 7 uses right there. Then you also have the skate park for number 8 and the basketball court for number 9, and now we're getting a lot of use down there. And so it seems to make sense. It's a great policy. I'd like to actually see it in our general plan. Something, not Fred Kent's language, the power of 10 or something like that, but just something about how we activate public spaces. And one aspect of his theory in activating public spaces is that there's often a retail component. And that could be a small kiosk that sells coffee. In South America, everywhere you go, they have these little cafecito stands. You just walk from one corner, you do a shot of espresso, you get to the next corner, you do another shot of espresso. Something like it. But
So you never go to sleep?
you never stop walking, that's for sure. But anyway, that the One San Bruno project is kind of an example of that. That's right there at the park. It could have some amenity that will allow people to get picnic supplies, juice for the kids, something like that, and that'll be another reason to go down to the park. And so I'd like to see a policy in our general plan that kind of addresses that approach to development and activating public spaces. Mm-hmm. It's a really high level.
I like the idea of incorporating that power of 10. I really do. I think it's...
Yeah, it may not apply to every situation, but
Right.
certainly I think it's probably a good rule of thumb.
Yes.
But, as long as we not make it like, apply to every situation you want. I mean,
It's just like
specifically
parking.
like a walking path or a dog.
It strikes me like this is an opportunity for some drafting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have no suggested language.
Yeah.
So noted.
Activate public space.
Now can we trundle off to page 3?
It's okay by me.
Let's see, we started down here, so how about Clark? Anything on page 3?
15.4B, it says consider adoption of a % for the arts ordinance to require development to assist in the finance of public arts needs of children. I mean, I like the concept, but that's basically an exaction, right? And a developer specified exaction, maybe.
No, I don't. As I understand it, this would be an ordinance. So you would pick out some sort of threshold in terms of development, and it would be charged against everybody on probably a square footage basis of development. So it really wouldn't fall as an exaction, I don't think.
Because we talked about this earlier as, in a different context, earmarking money, which is different funds that would come in. From this, it seems like, it could really, instead of specifying it for art needs of children, but for education of kids, you know what I mean? In this case, we're specifically saying arts, but if you can do it in ordinance and not from an exaction point, I think, from an educational standpoint,
I could support that. I had
Yeah.
issues with specifying the arts just for kids as, a goal of the whole project as well.
Yeah, to expand it out.
Yeah.
I actually had exactly the same concern, rather than just limiting to children.
Well, just for your information, we're on a staff level starting to look at maybe the potential of some sort of capital development fee that would be charged against all development, no matter where it happened in town, excluding obviously residential. That's a different issue, but all commercial development. And that would create a pot of money that then you as a council could go through and decide where, your priorities were. Because I think you want to be careful that you don't have too many competing, efforts on this, because there is a threshold in terms of what development can handle. But I think that we are certainly, our scenario here over the next 5, 10, 15 years is probably a fairly robust commercial growth. And if that's going to take place, it's a real opportunity for us to be able to create some funds to do the facilities that we'd like to see in town, including this.
So then maybe we should retool this whole program?
Well, I haven't really talked with the planning director on that. Let me talk with him on how we should approach it in terms of the general plan. I need to also talk with other staff people in terms of just how we would go about doing this.
On this 15.4B, let me make two specific suggestions. First of all, percent for the arts sounds like 1%. And I think a percentage would likely be clearer. And I would like to add commercial in front of the word development. It may be everybody has assumed, or it might apply to multi-family or 10-unit residential or something like that, but I'd like us not to assume, to specify.
Well, I think we're going to come back and visit this, aren't we?
Oh, yes.
I'm assuming so, but I'm trying to be as specific as I can in making suggestions.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I've heard 3 to say percent or percentage for education, not specified on the arts.
For the arts, for
Education.
can include arts. So,
Yeah.
anything else on program 15.4?
I had a comment on 15.4C. I just changed the language. Instead of saying consider the need for play areas for children when new public and private open areas or parks are proposed in development projects, I crossed out quite a bit of it. And so what I have is provide for children in public and private development projects.
Provide for children.
In public and private development projects.
How about provide amenities for children?
That's fine. Play areas.
Yeah, that's too specific.
Okay. Question on 17A.
Are we through 16? Please, 17A.
17A said prohibit land use changes that would result in development that would be located on a ridgeline. And it says, unless a design review permit is approved by the Planning Commission. This what prompted that? I mean, if we're going
to through the chair, what prompted that is several months of community turmoil over working out the 8 Thomas project to fit into that ridge line in a way that kind of respected the ridge line and the view that you get when you come over San Bruno and so forth. So that there's always been a program concerned about that, and there's a section in the zoning ordinance that applied to A. Thomas, and I think we're just trying to, give it a place here in the general plan.
Well, it seems like it's more of an avenue to me, and it kind of severely weakens it. I mean, to me, if we're going to prohibit land use changes that would result in development on a ridge line located on a ridge line, period.
Well, what it does,
it's real clear.
What it does is it subjects development to a design review by the Planning Commission. In those cases, it says those particular locations on ridge lines are have a standing that can interrupt views, interrupt the natural topography, and so that gives the Planning Commission some design review authority over them. The reason that we were able to, and for the most part, while it was a struggle, I think there seems to be a general response that the outcome of taming the original design of the building on A. Thomas has been a good thing. That it's more respectful than what was originally proposed. But the way that was done was kind of awkwardly through the fact that the commission had some discretionary review because it was there was some habitat conservation plan area there, and that triggered a discretionary review with an ND, a negative declaration, because of the habitat area. And because of that discretion, the Planning Commission was able to use that. Here we're trying to make it more of a standard that if you're on a ridgeline, you would get some kind of design review to assure that the structure that was being designed was respectful to the ridgeline and the topography.
I think this can be much more clearly stated, and it was another one that I would encourage that you put your head together with council.
Yeah, because it's not resonating with me. I hear what you're saying, Bill, in that specific case, but I think you're dealing with ridge lines, and I think the whole idea was to be real clear about it.
So how can we make sure that this is on your list to discuss with Mr. Prince?
I got a question.
Please, Si.
And here again, we talked about design reviews will only apply to commercial and multi-unit. Here you have it for residential.
That's
Mr. Through the chair, we are, and certainly the council can reject the staff's recommendation, but we're recommending that the ridge lines are not the same as just any other single-family zone property.
Then you want to clearly.
And so that's why we're recommending it.
You want
may
to
not
hang on.
Go ahead.
consider it.
You need to expressly say that so that the meaning jumps out at you and is absolutely clear. I don't think this is.
No. And the problem I've had with all of this stuff is, as I mentioned before, if I stand in front of the building, it blocks the whole mountain for me. So therefore, it cannot be built. Or if I go down on one of the trails or on Bay Shore, depending on where I position myself, a portion of it could be blocking the ridge line, and therefore we have a problem. I move 20 feet over, and it doesn't block the ridge line. I mean, this is a bogus thing. I've asked about that we get some real definite specifics here so that it's clear in everybody's mind, so that I can't go out there and start manipulating things and throw everything in this whole, it should be very clear. If you don't want to allow somebody to build on the ridge line, that's it. And then you have to be clear definition of what is a ridge line. That's my concern.
That was my point.
So we have a further definitional challenge.
it has a major impact, truly.
Anything else on policy 17?
Yes, I had one on 17B, but actually, if I could go to 18A because it relates to this
Sure.
discussion on 8 Thomas. And so what happened was there was a large structure proposed for that site that would sit right on top of the site, right on top of the ridgeline. The negotiated solution was increasing the grading of the site, excavation of the site by threefold in order to get the house to sit down into the side of the hill there. And so when I read Program 18A, in conjunction with land use development applications, encourage options that minimize grading and transformation of the landform and fit comfortably with the topography, what strikes me is that the solution that the community found acceptable to 8 Thomas was
Grading.
3 times the grading that originally proposed. But that grading allows the structure to fit comfortably with the topography. So my suggestion for Program 18A is to remove the words minimize grading and the transformation of the landform, so that the new Program 18A would read, in conjunction with land use development applications, encourage options that fit comfortably with the topography.
Sounds good. I see heads nodding.
I mean, it's, grading, when I started on Planning Commission, I always wanted to minimize grading. And through
Actually-
this whole process, I'm seeing that that's not always the answer.
Actually, that one actually could have not had that amount of grading if it actually made it up to council level. It could have moved down further. So, I mean, in a sense, that is what it is, and that's what they came up with at the time. But if we brought it up to council level, it would have been a heck of a lot more enforceable than what was given to them.
But the point, I think we all agreed upon, is
Yes.
fitting it with the ridgeline.
It could be a double-edged sword. I don't know. I hear what you're saying on it in that one particular case.
Well, I have another one.
Yeah.
Sierra Point Road, the house that I think is on the
Yes.
market for $1 million or so. And there were construction issues as always. But again, there was a tremendous amount of grading for that. It fits into the hillside now, so that the house doesn't, it's not like some of houses that step up the hillside so that they are huge from a distance and they loom way up there, but they actually fit into the hillside, so they're more compact, and I think they're more street friendly, and they actually help with widening the street as well. So I mean, there's a lot of the way I see it is there's a lot of advantages to actually excavating the hillside to get these homes in there.
Okay, so what are your suggestions, Mike, in conjunction with land use development applications? You're saying
Encourage options that fit comfortably with the topography.
What is comfortable?
Well, it's the same language we've had in there for 10 years.
Means something that the 5 of us are comfortable with.
And the community was comfortable with the excavation on A. Thomas. So,
Okay.
we found a way to use the word.
Are you okay
I was
with
just going to say, just fit
I think maybe
fit
with-
the topography. How about approved by the council?
You
I'd kind
don't
of
want
like
everything to come to the council.
Get rid of the whole general plan.
Good. Clark, please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that maybe, in conjunction with land use development applications, encourage options that fit comfortably with the topography. And I want to say something that will encouraging minimizing grading if that's the best option. You know what I mean? I don't want to.
You don't need to add the specific, though.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take away from it where, it's all of a sudden like this is what somebody comes up with as their option, you know what I mean? And it may not be the best option. And the idea of minimizing grading too is not, ripping away the hillside and, say like some of the concern of kicking out the toe, like what we faced with Bayshore down there, kicking the toe of the mountain out that can cause landslides. You know what I mean? Just looking at it.
It seems to me that we have controls over that we do have protections from destroying the toe. That we require the geologic investigations.
Yeah.
And I understand your concern.
Yeah.
But believe me, this is this is a big step for me in thinking about grading. I mean, I'm just looking at how things have gone. I'm watching the construction around us and seeing what works. And I think about those houses on Trinity that the former planning commissioner built, Gloria Ramos, and how they step up. I don't think that they were excavated as extensively. They kind of step up, don't they? The hillside?
It is done in steps.
Yeah.
They didn't just take out a huge chunk.
Right.
Yeah, the ones on the uphill slope you're talking about.
Yeah, right. And I compare those to that house that just got built, that's on the market on Sierra Point, and that one they just took out that big chunk and put the house in, and in my mind, I'm thinking that didn't turn out so bad. I mean, the design of the house is a different matter, but, the bulk and scale and how it fits into the street seemed to work out pretty good to me compared to the Trinity houses I was referring
Well, I
to.
guess at the same time, too, you don't want to use it as a hammer to, make people that you got to do that also, because, we have those ordinances about uphill grading on allowing people to put a garage in without having the standard setback and things like that because of the expense of it, so.
I would venture to guess that staff has not gotten anything resembling direction.
No, that's because we're still discussing it, so. I don't think you're in a hurry, are you?
In that case, let me recommend that we take 5 minutes here.
All right.
Okay.
Maybe that'll clarify things.
I guess on this one, on 18A,
Yes.
maybe if we can kind of have staff look at it, putting something about while respecting the topography. You know, I want to make sure that it's just not a rip and tear, you know, that there is still some kind of protection, that we're not, you know, fitting comfortably may be subjective from one person to another. So if we can kind of look at retooling that. Michael and I were talking, I know where he's coming from on that and certainly understand it, but at the same time, you know, it's kind of subjective too on what comfortable is and that type of thing. So perhaps we can come up with some language that looks at, you know.
So I'm going to assume that instruction is absolutely clear and that we can move on.
I have 18.
I take that as a yes.
Please.
I have 18. It says, respect the natural topography of the mountain in design and construction.
It says respect the topography of the mountain.
Yeah, natural topography of the mountain. In design and construction.
Well, first of all, they've added the word natural.
Natural, right.
We wouldn't want to deal with the unnatural topography?
I know, I'm just, I'm looking at in design and construction. What is, how do you do that?
Through the chair. This policy, of course, other than the word natural, was in the general plan.
Yeah, I understand that.
And usually you do that through hillside design guidelines. A lot of communities have ridgelines and extensive ridgelines and hillsides have design guidelines for some of the things that you've been talking about tonight, about if it's fitting in comfortably, maybe they say nestling into the slope. There's various words that's been used to describe it, but is essentially not just, you know, tearing apart the side of the hill or the side of the mountain, but there's a way that you can design a structure to fit in and keep the profile. It's the difference. Trying to respect the profile of the ridge line and the hillside by fitting into it.
At the risk
Different
of
ways
moving,
of saying the same thing.
At the risk of moving us forward, I think we're talking about the same issue.
Yeah, and this is like
So let's
program 18A.
let's have that included in the clarity discussion. Anything on policy 19?
I know that 19C we were dealing. Didn't we already deal a little bit with safety? What I was thinking was that in reevaluating the tree protection ordinance, we might want to say something about fire safety, particularly where the wildland meets the built structures in town.
That suggestion rings well with at least one of your colleagues.
Good.
Yeah, I think this is one we were discussing a couple weeks back.
Yep.
Yes.
So, I think
Anything else on policy on programs 19?
I had a question on 19A. Identify and map public vistas and view corridors of community-wide value to be preserved and enhanced.
Through the
And
chair.
staff has added the word public.
That's all. To what was already there.
I understand it was, yeah.
And it's a program to identify the vistas to be preserved. I don't know what else to say about it.
I understand. I just wanted an example. What extent? Maybe I can discuss that, Mr. Mayor, with the planning director.
Well, fine. I don't know that adding the word public,
Yeah.
is adding the word public intended to add something that wasn't there?
I think it's an attempt to clarify that we're not trying to protect private views, which, it gets kind of murky, but sometimes,
That's what I was worried about.
you want to make that distinction that the city's regulations are not attempting to protect people's views per se. Community-wide views, yes. Individual views, no.
At the risk of building our city attorney's fees, I think this would be a good clarification to discuss with him.
I just had a question about the new policy. Encourage construction of residential and commercial buildings that are sensitive to the local architectural context, mountain setting.
Word "and"
Yeah,
should be
it'd
added.
And mountain setting, comma. It says encourage construction of green buildings that surpass the green building ordinance standards. That hasn't been adopted yet, but we're talking about the one that I think it's at Planning Commission level right now?
Correct.
Oh, okay. And that's was being developed by Planning Commission that they would adopt.
That's correct. It'll be coming to councils shortly.
Yeah.
Why would we want to surpass the green building ordinance standards?
Through the chair, the operative word there is encourage. It's not mandatory, but I think in the discussion of the green building ordinance, that one of the aspects that has come out is there'll be standards, whatever it is, silver, gold, whatever the standard is. But that doesn't mean on a whole the city does encourage people to incorporate green into things where they wouldn't even be within the threshold of the ordinance that would require them to do it. It's just the city would encourage people to be as green as you can be, I guess, is the intent there.
If I may, I think as time goes on too, that these these are going to become more and more high standards. Like a LEED's platinum may be normal in 10 years. That may be the low standard.
So you're gonna have to have a diamond.
Yeah, and I think with global warming and everything like that, and I believe that the governor is certainly on board with that. But you just see things kind of drifting more towards that way. That at some point maybe the legislature will pass laws that make that so. And so that would probably change from encourage to.
That surpasses what threw me. If we want to encourage people to build it by the green building ordinance, okay. Why do we need to suddenly pass it?
Well, it's encouraged. Yeah, I mean that's.
Well, I understand that.
Well, you don't need encourage as far as the ordinance because most of the ordinance is mandatory.
Sure.
So I think what they're saying here is if you're going above and beyond what's mandatory.
Okay. And we have a definition of what surpassing it. I mean, we know what surpassing the green building ordinance means. Or there are standards that surpass it, or.
In LEED, there's different levels, as Councilmember Conway was saying. There's different levels right now. I mean, the state, the governor, some time ago established silver for state buildings, and I think that has probably caused more communities to get on board with the idea, and so we see the levels keep being pushed higher. So this. I think this policy language just expresses support even for those who wouldn't be captured under the thresholds to be required to do a green building. We're encouraging to do green nevertheless.
Yeah, and I commend the Planning Commission for putting that policy in. Cliff, you guys, good job.
I have a clarifying question in this area, if I may.
Please.
Speaking of ridge line, it says mountain setting. Would that be
Which policy are
the
you
same
at?
policy?
New policy.
New policy, sorry, that Cy was just talking about. The word that we just corrected, architectural contest and mountain setting.
Do you think ridge line should be added there?
I thought so. Or maybe instead of mountain setting, it should say and ridge line.
The mountain setting is more than the ridge line, but I would be inclined to add
The
ridge line and mountain setting. Does that work?
So it'd be architectural context, comma, mountain setting, and ridge line.
Well, I was reading this as the architectural context and the mountain setting were just kind of general backdrops for for new construction of residential and commercial buildings, and it wasn't necessarily specifically addressing the mountain or any particular feature of it, but just respecting it. It seemed to me that the ridgeline issue is something different.
Yeah.
To me, it was more like a palette that reflects the mountain colors or something of that nature. I'm just guessing, but it didn't seem like there was a restriction on where to build on the mountain.
I agree.
Well-
It wasn't meant to be locationally specific.
The reason I took it that way was because it says sensitive to the local architect. And the word local architect took me a little bit further than just the look of the mountain, or that's why I thought
Well, it's local
good.
architectural context. That's different.
Yep.
And I actually had an issue with architectural context.
Please.
So this program's new policy says encourage construction of residential and commercial buildings that are sensitive to the local architectural context. And then in the next policy, policy 20,
Gets into design review.
it says retain diversity and individual expression in the design of single-family residential development. So to me, those two policies are at odds. On the one hand, you want everything to fit in with what currently exists, but on the other hand, you want people to be able to express their individuality and build whatever they can envision. Me personally, I go for the individual vision. I mean, that's one of the things I like about Brisbane. You know, you can build your vision here, and there's no architectural review board that says you can't do it. You can paint to your own palette, and I think that's a good thing.
Through the chair, I think
Please.
one of the things that has been evolving here that the commission and the staff are trying to speak to is treating single-family residential homes, kind of the old adage, you know, man's kingdom, so forth, differently than investment property, than multifamily and commercial property. That the plan talks and the guidelines talk a lot about Brisbane's vernacular, but it doesn't say what that consists of. So this is kind of an attempt to focus in to retain a degree of diversity and for single-family residential homes. A man's home is his castle. That was the expression I was trying to think of. But when it comes to property that you invite the public into, that there should be a different standard, and it isn't anything goes. It's that there are guidelines for commercial development in the downtown, and there are some criterion elements of design that are generally express some degree of continuity, rather than just an anything goes kind of approach to the commercial property as opposed to single-family residential property. That there's that you might want to treat those two categories differently.
I suspect that people agree with the thought, but I don't think it's well expressed here. I think you could be much clearer that we respect a lot or wish there to be much more freedom where it comes to single-family residential than where it comes to multifamily or commercial. And
Through the chair, just
Please.
policy number 20 is adding specific language that would say the design of single-family development. So it's calling out that. Whereas maybe new policy, the new policy, encourage construction of, that you also have been talking about, encourage construction of multifamily and commercial buildings. Maybe that should be clarified.
Multifamily residential and commercial buildings.
There's a thought of treating those two as two different and distinct categories in
Yeah.
terms of whether, how much diversity you would allow.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
I suspect the feeling on the council is you permit much more diversity and individual choice for single-family residences.
Right, but what your suggestion, I think what Bill's saying is, if I hear correctly, maybe on the new policy is encourage construction of multifamily residential and commercial buildings that are sensitive to the local architectural context and mountain setting. And in that sense, it clarifies it. And then the next one is retain diversity and individual expression in the design of single-family residential development. Right? We're talking two different things then, right?
Adding multifamily to the first new policy would improve it, I think.
Yeah.
Does it?
And that's clarifies it.
Clarifies it.
I keep on thinking about Sierra Point, and I think about the Good Guys building and the, what was it, the Cole building, and they are nothing alike. There is nothing alike. And I think that's good. I'm almost of a mind that I would like to see some diversity in commercial. I like design criteria, design review. I like design review of commercial buildings, but I also like diversity in commercial buildings. I don't want everything to look like the Hitachi building. I mean, it's a fine building, but I don't want everything to look the same. We have the Homewood Suites, which looks completely different from the Radisson. So I would like to encourage that sort of diversity of design. That's just me. And I agree with it.
As long as it fits the architectural context of the city.
Yeah, I guess it depends what we mean by that too, because architectural context, and mountain setting. I mean, and now we're getting, and you know what I mean.
Because in Thomas area,
And it's not an enforceable thing; it's encouraged. I don't know. Now that I'm looking at this one, I'm thinking that policy actually should maybe be broken up into two policies.
Absolutely. The green building should be split out.
Yeah, that
Its
should
own
be its own
policy.
separate policy.
Right.
I think we're all agreed on that.
Okay. So to separate that last part out into its own policy, and then I guess it's coming up with encourage.
I find drafting by committee to be very difficult.
Well, it's long and arduous.
Might we let staff have another shot at this one?
That's what we pay them the big bucks for. Okay.
Through the chair, it sounded as though there's, and I think, you can think of different sub areas where you might feel differently about this. Sierra Point is a classic example of individually sculptured buildings that doesn't have this continuity, and that's okay. That's how it developed as a suburban office park. Although the struggle now is with the remaining buildings and trying to create a public space out there that is surrounded by private buildings. Should they pay any respect to? Should they continue with the suburban individual building style, or should they, how do they transition to fit a
Like a Levison
kind of a
property.
round hole and a square peg in a round hole?
Right,
kind of
like the Levison property or Bayshore. We should have some kind of context there, and I think that's what you're saying.
on that other level of in the mountain setting,
Yeah.
context of the mountain setting. But in terms of the architectural, you really you either have this diversity, kind of like Sierra Point began to be, and as single-family architecture in town is encouraged to be diverse. In fact, there's a provision about it's 20B on when the design is essentially this. It says, consider amendments to prohibit insurance of a building permit for a single-family dwelling on a lot of record when the design is essentially the same as that on any immediately adjacent lot. So that that's a strict prohibition demanding diversity so that no two houses next to each other could look alike. And we're not recommending any change to that, and that's consistent with Policy 20, Program 20B. But in the it may be what we'll do is we'll come back and think this through a little bit more and see if it might be a sub area kind of thing. Maybe in Sierra Point it would be treated differently than it would be in central Brisbane as opposed to some other sub area, because I think that's Councilmember Barnes seems to be concerned that would affect Sierra Point and the subsequent buildings out there as forcing some kind of continuity between them that has never been the case up until now.
Well, it depends. We had, I forgot which meeting it was, there was an architect that made a presentation about development on Sierra Point, and he cringed at the thought of having diverse architecture throughout. He wanted the blocks by blocks and all that. That was beautiful. I disagree. I think, I like diversity. I like the diverse architecture that we have there, and I hope people will continue using it.
Well, yeah, we're talking two different things here, is what it sounds like, and
Please define them.
yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking diversity of architecture out at Sierra Point, but I think maybe this one here, this particular one, may be more pertinent towards, not from a sailboat out in the bay, but, right up against the mountains, such as like what we discussed, Levison property or Bay Shore, that type of look, right, where you're...
Does anyone have any suggestion as to how we go forward?
Send it back with staff. Have them break it out. Probably, I think, would be the best thing. Break it out.
I don't have any suggestion, but I wanted to say when I read policy number 20, I really thought it's in conflict with right there, the policy, new policy above. That's how I took it. In one hand, we're saying that, and what makes Brisbane unique, and we talked about preserving the community, and it's the diversity that we have, no doubt. At the same time, look at the issue that happened with Thomas Avenue Home. The person was exercising diversity, his design, what he wanted. So how do you incorporate this with the above policy?
You say consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. But other than that, I don't think you can use Thomas as a very good example, because that was as clear an example of ridgeline development as we're going to get. At least I hope as we're going to get. So I wouldn't take that as the example for the larger. Please.
I kind of liked Clark's language I think he had earlier about encouraging construction of, what was it, multifamily
residential and commercial buildings that are sensitive to the local architectural context in mountain setting.
Yes, I would like that.
We're agreed.
Yeah, and then break that off, and then another policy would be encourage construction of green buildings that surpass the green building ordinance standards.
Right on.
And we're agreed on that. Be happy to give you my notes. Can we move on? I see there's another new policy on this page. Require that all commercial and multifamily residential development comply with the design guidelines.
What design guidelines?
Yeah, I was going to say, where do we have that?
Through the chair, for instance, the design guidelines for visitation, storefronts, commercial zoning, were adopted after the general plan was adopted. So they're not recognized in the general plan, and this is just a way to recognize them and give them that additional degree of recognition and authority by mentioning them in the general plan.
Then perhaps we should say
For commercial.
with any applicable design guidelines or something that doesn't seem to refer to design guidelines that are in place today. You okay with that?
So strike the and put any applicable?
Yes.
Comply with
So
applicable design guidelines.
So it would require that all commercial, multifamily, residential development comply with any applicable design guidelines?
I think that's what I'm hearing. Yes. Heads are nodding on that one.
Okay.
Now we have another new program on this page, which I wonder whether it's necessary in light of our changes to the prior one.
I don't think so. It looks like we're going back to square one from here.
Through the chair, I think again, this is a program, it's not a policy, so it would be something that would be looked at in terms of if you're going to require resident, multifamily and commercial buildings that are sensitive to the local architectural context and so forth. One thing the guidelines, policies refer to is, and we'll be talking more about this actually next week with Central Brisbane, as is mention of a vernacular. But it raises the question, is as far as commercial multifamily, again, I'm not talking about single family, but is diversity of vernacular in architecture. Architecture vernacular means a regional style of architecture and materials and so forth. It doesn't. So there was I think in the review at the Planning Commission level, there was a desire to say, okay, is there something we can point to guide people in the guidelines as to what that means when it says architectural, Brisbane's architectural vernacular.
Well,
so I think it was a program to work on that, at a staff level, maybe with a few of the architects in town that do commercial architecture and say, what is the vernacular? What are we telling people when they're going to come build a new commercial building or remodel a building? What is the vernacular we want? Do we want to have that discussion? And that's what this program would do, is have that discussion.
May I speak?
Please.
I think this new program, the defining vernacular, probably goes back to 21A, because you talk about vernacular on 21A, and maybe this comes on the following
21A.
page, the very first item, it says Program 21A.
Where's that at? Oh, okay.
That's on the next page.
Right. So in here that you're saying that you're going to define the vernacular, and here you're going to be using it. So if we cross this out, then that's going to be...
Well, what I've heard so far is that we don't want anything like this for single-family residences.
Correct.
And we don't particularly want anything like this for Sierra Point. Am I correct
Correct.
so far?
Wait a minute, don't want what for Sierra Point?
A definition of vernacular architecture.
I think these two programs.
Hang on.
I know we said that up above here, so what does vernacular mean?
It's referring that there is a style of architecture or some combination of styles or a number of styles of architecture that are characterize Brisbane. And what this is saying is we've got guidelines that talk about a vernacular that's not defined. So all this is a program to say, get some of the architects in the community together, whatever, and see if there's a way. Lacking that, then anybody that develops commercial or multifamily residential comes to town, and they have no idea what that vernacular is, so they just do anything. And this is an attempt to create a program that would try to define, by looking at the existing buildings, and provide guidance in the guidelines to new development what is this vernacular that's Brisbane.
Michael?
So if we have a vernacular and we apply that design guideline or that vernacular definition to any new architecture, we're just going to get more of the same. And so is there really a problem with having somebody come to Brisbane and try to build something and not know what our expectations are? I mean, I like the idea of maintaining control with design guidelines, but not necessarily giving people design guidelines. I mean, I like the idea of saying, well, you build it, and then we'll tell you if we like it or not. Or you design it and show it to us, and then we'll decide, because then we might get something new, something different, something that we like, that we don't have now. And there's lots of materials that we have not seen any buildings made of in Brisbane yet. And I think they're attractive and durable materials. There's, green buildings in San Francisco, a multi-family building that's made out of recycled cardboard, I think, that's impregnated with some dye, and that's part of the siding of the building. It was passive solar designed. Really intriguing materials that are beautiful and that actually use kind of natural dyes and pigments, and I think would be a benefit to the town. But we don't have anything like that here now. The question is do we want the same old thing, or do we want to be surprised with the possibility of getting something new?
Seppi?
Yes. I think what I heard Bill saying, it has happened many times that we've heard from developers or somebody that is building home. They don't tell us ahead of time what they expect, and then when we are building, it goes to Planning Commission, then that's all this stuff comes up, and they want us to know, after all this much money that we spent, they want us to go ahead and change things. Am I understanding that's what you're saying?
Yes, that's part of it, to provide, that's the whole point of having design guidelines, is to characterize in a general way, what is the vernacular, what's the preferred styles of architecture, rather than kind of an anything goes. And while staff has recommended, and that's why we recommend the dichotomy to treat single family from multifamily and commercial property differently, both because where it's located, and it's really the public interaction.
I get where you're going on this, but I think I agree with Michael on leaving it more open, because we do address it up here when on a new policy when we said encourage construction of multifamily residential and commercial buildings that are sensitive to local architectural context and the mountain settings. Right, we're saying, okay, well, we're sensitive to it, but down here the program is to define specificities, I guess, which...
At the risk of moving this along, I can count, and I see heads nodding, and my view is that this new program to define Brisbane's vernacular architecture does not have votes.
Yeah,
my suggestion on this is to strike the word define and just to use the word list. Now, if people if they want to, come in with a project that they know they can get a design review on, and they want a list of the vernacular in town, we can provide them with a list.
But they can go look at it.
Well, true. Yeah, that's true.
Would you rather have a list or go out to Sierra Point and look at it?
Or, yeah.
What you normally do. I think there was a point made, but just to clarify, whenever you go in for a building permit or you're supplying plans, you get a whole packet of material, everything you ever want to know about building a house, right? So
How much
If you don't want to
longer?
comply with those rules, that's your problem.
This
How,
is
how much
multi-
longer do we want to discuss this page?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of a tough one because when you look at it, look at the mishmash that we have right now. It could be a voluminous.
I just recite you to the history of Brisbane, a spirit of independence.
Yeah.
I think some of that still lags.
Okay, maybe you could think about, I guess, just to give staff direction to retool that as or whatever, right?
So don't delete that, maybe reword it, add list or whatever, right?
For further consideration. Moving on to page 5 of 11.
These numbered? Oh yeah, they are.
Up at the upper left. And bearing in mind that we are going to recess at 10:30.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Comments on page 5.
Well,
Here we have,
Side.
All I have is the new program in the middle of the page that says clarify the design permit requirements for remodeling existing structures. Design permit requirements. What does that mean?
I think that is a new program that actually I think Tim suggested it to get greater clarification on remodels as opposed to new structures
Yeah.
that we're lacking.
But if I want to remodel something, you're going to tell me what the design permit requirements are? I'm curious about this design permit, and this does not exclude single-family dwellings either, does it?
This is single-family dwellings wouldn't be subject to it.
Doesn't say that.
Well, there's the ordinance specifies when a design permit is required. So, if you trigger a design permit, then the design review is applied. That's normally how it goes. If you're subject to a design permit, then you're reviewed for the criteria. There's some remodels that apparently would trigger the design review, and but it's unclear what that should consist of when it's in the case of a remodel, as opposed to building a new structure. So
I don't like the terminology, design permit requirement.
When you say triggers design review, Bill, does that mean it goes to the planning commission? Automatically?
that's as it is now. This is not a new requirement to drag other things in. This is just saying when you're required to get a design permit in the case where it's a remodel, that needs some clarification because right now it's unclear.
It's like if Tim decides, oh, I think this does, or something like you're saying it doesn't have any criteria.
It's more of an internal staff work to revise the design permit requirements for remodels, so that.
Bill, would the Expeditors building be an example?
Well, that's a commercial, but
Right.
this
Yeah.
applies to all buildings.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't, but I think that there's a need probably throughout the document to clarify that point. We'll do that.
Oh, this is commercial then?
Yes.
It would have to be commercial.
Okay, because then it's what's I'd probably throw in is like above says identify criteria for height limit exceptions up to 35 feet.
You can just say existing
That's to be
commercial
moved.
structures or existing commercial and multifamily.
Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. You good with that?
I'm good with it.
Okay. Existing commercial structures, okay.
Any other comments on this page?
the 21A, the architectural vernacular is there. This is what Seppi was referring to earlier, wanting to define the architectural vernacular of the downtown district. I mean, I like all the other things. I like the, addressing the design concerns about this building and the street edge, the pedestrian facilities and amenities, parking, transit, and bicycle facilities. I agree with all that. That's all fine to me. It's just that vernacular. It's just, if we're going to define downtown Brisbane as the moment in time now, with all these structures that have been built in the 60s and 70s, I imagine, then that's what we're going to end up building in the future as well. And I'm not convinced that's,
And I think that's been echoed.
Okay. Great, that was the only comment on that page.
I think 30s and 40s is more improvement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Page 6. The only thing I have is a new program of establishing a list of historic structures and sites. I thought we tossed that out earlier, last time, didn't we?
I don't remember, but my question was, what will the definition of historic be?
Your house.
Yeah, we tossed that, and we said that if there's ever a development of it, and the roundhouse came into play.
The roundhouse was about the
That's
only
fine,
thing.
yeah.
And maybe the
If that's the
machinery.
case, then there'll be something real exact from the developer.
Well, there's quite a few, I think, that were the Roundhouse, the Machinery and Equipment Company,
Alamont Hotel.
the one that got
Seven
tore
Mile
down.
House.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ones, but yeah, I think what you say, Steve, is we have to come up with like what is considered historic. I mean, at what point do we go back? I mean, we can call a 23 Club an historic structure. I mean, it's certainly historic from the country western venue, but
Not necessarily architecturally historic.
yeah, or it might be built in the 20s or 30s, late 30s,
I think
mid
that was the
30s.
30s. I think it was a public works project.
Yeah,
What I'm concerned about this is that if we start creating a list, people are going to get very creative. And there are very few structures in town and they're not going to get on this list. And that's not the purpose of it. I don't think we need this, period.
maybe
What's
establish criteria for a list. I mean, historic structures.
Other issues with talking about historic structures are people feel that their enjoyment or their ability to sell the structure is limited. There's been a big brouhaha down the peninsula about houses past a certain age being called historic, and that got people up in arms because it depressed the value of their property, because once it was identified as historic, you couldn't tear it down, you couldn't enjoy the advantage of owning your own property and doing with it what you like.
Woodside and Steve Jobs, as I recall.
There's that, but Palo Alto went through this about 5 years ago. And
I think they just went to it recently with was it Juana's, that lady Juana Martinez or something like that, her home, going through it right now, going through a lawsuit. Anyway, but that's if it's put on a state historical site, isn't it? I mean, is there a difference between if you say, well, it's a historic building, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, does it?
I think it would depend on how we'd write our ordinance, but I was going to point out that you already have all this in your general plan right now. The only thing that was being suggested was creating a list of what structures we're talking about.
Yeah.
You all bring up very good points in terms of historic preservation programs. And,
That's different, though.
That's different.
That's different than creating a list. Just because it's on a list doesn't mean it's,
I don't know, let the attorney answer that, but I would think just because it's on a list doesn't really mean much.
No, we don't have a heritage preservation ordinance. Where you run into problems like that is if somebody gets officially designated, and especially if there are restrictions on modification or destruction, like Steve Jobs was literally prevented from tearing down a house even though he had city approval.
Yes.
There was other people who brought suit and prevailed. So when you have an ordinance that gives some level of protection to historic structures, then you create the possibility of preventing someone from doing something that they want to do.
I don't think we should have that, period.
Well, if you're going to have that discussion, I suggest that you look at your existing general plan programs, because the existing general plan leads you in the direction to do just that.
Through the chair, And
Please.
this new program is under Policy 23, which says encourage the maintenance and upgrading of structures and sites that have played an important role in the city's history. And so this program is just trying to flesh out what does that policy pertain to? You know, what, and it doesn't, historic important roles, certainly the 23 Club would be example of a place that has played a historic role in the cultural events of the city. So maybe that would be on the list.
And I'm not sure how 23C operates. So we already have.
I think you're in a position.
I have that
right-
underlined. I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think you're in a position right now that if the building was, a private owner came in to tear down a building that some people in the community thought had historic value, they would come and say, your general
That's right.
plan suggests at the very least that there ought to be an ordinance in place to protect that from happening. So if that's not a policy direction you want to go, then I think we need to look at the existing general plan.
Yeah, I have reservations about 23C.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm just reflecting on the experience that I'm aware of, which was the Palo Alto experience, and that as soon as somebody's house went on that list, there were lawsuits. I mean, it was just a mess down there, and I would be concerned about saying the 23 Club is a historic site. I mean, I think it is, but if we then say you can't tear it down, you can't fix it up, you know.
You don't want to go there.
Yeah, or if you can't sell it to somebody and they want to put in new retail or retail and housing above or something like that, and we're saying you can't do that, I don't know that that's overall a benefit to town.
Well, see, this one's a double-edged sword. Because,
It really is.
It is, and I think we had a lot of discussion about this, as I recall back then in '94, because this is the original stuff, and I think just making a list is adding to that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think 23B is another one. Provide information to owners of historic structures regarding state tax.
Well, that's an incentive
Incentives.
that's an incentive to
Because-
rehabilitate. That's
If you're going to file, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to file with the state for it.
No, we're just encouraging property owners to pursue whether they could obtain an incentive, but we're not requiring them to do anything.
No, you're not requiring it, but if they do that, then that, bang, they got on the state now.
Then that would have been their choice. 23C, though, as I read it, really contemplates a local ordinance. If someone voluntarily wants to apply to the state and get their property designated, then that's their choice. And then they're going to be under primarily state regulation, not local regulation.
Yeah, local regulations, I mean, you want to encourage them to fix it up if it was, old and whatever, and give them whatever means and help them out, by inspections or whatever if they need to do that. And I think that's what this idea is, not to choke them.
Except C does.
yeah.
I wouldn't use the term choke, but C clearly is to set up an
Restrict.
preservation ordinance. Yeah, that's mission is to preserve the property,
Yeah.
regardless of the interest of the property owner.
But at the same time, I mean, you don't want it tore down either. I mean,
Well, it's a policy issue.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is have that discussion and, realize that it's there, and that there is a building that somebody thinks should come under this,
I don't
you're
like
going
this
to
whole thing.
somebody's going to be here saying you should have your ordinance in place.
Right. I don't know. I think we should leave it in. This is one that was from the original general plan and we voted on, so ratified.
Well, there's a difference between leaving 23C in and adding a new program to actually list them. Is there not? I mean, doesn't listing them take it to another
I think it
degree?
probably takes it to another level, yeah. I don't know, Bill, if you got any further thought on that, or
Well,
it certainly focuses members of the public on which buildings to pursue that sort of an approach on.
Sometimes sleeping dogs are best
Left unticked.
So eliminate that program.
Sounds good to me.
I think the consensus is that the new program is not. Anything more on page 6?
Can we, discussing further Program 23C, would you entertain the option of saying, confer official designation to historical structures that the owners ask for that designation for? I mean, if an owner wants their building to be historical, they could apply to the city and say, determine if I have a historical structure or not, and if I do, give me the benefit of that designation, rather than the city going out and trying to determine of its own accord which structure is historic or not.
Well, what if we have a case where, say the roundhouse, for instance, is I know we've specifically said that, we want to keep that, and machinery and equipment, the guy wants to tear it down or something, and we consider that as historical. And what means would the city have to do anything about it?
Buy it.
Well, with regards to the roundhouse, I think in the specific plan, you could address that issue, right?
And it is addressed.
And I think it's been anticipated that we will have something in the specific plan that's got more teeth to it. So it'd probably be any of the other structures outside of the
Yeah, it goes deeper than that too. I mean, what if the family sold the 23 Club and the guy says, "Well, I'd like to tear it down and build a mixed-use facility with residential units on top and storage below." Just that single instance there would actually change the character of Brisbane. In a sense, you know what I mean, is you're starting to do character changes with the core, and so I mean, it's not a simple thing.
No, but changes aren't always bad. I mean, Dick's Tower is an example of a change that may not have been bad, and it was.
Dick's Tower change was not bad.
And the Cozy Cove. I'm just throwing out historic structures that have gone away and what replaced them. People are comfortable with. Just examples of them.
Yeah. I mean, those are examples, but they weren't. I mean, Dick's Tower was different than the 23 Club. It wasn't.
Well, that was not what's there today is not the original Dick's Tower.
Yeah, it wasn't.
That one burned down. I remember that one.
Designated stopover for the country western venues. So,
and then we took the old theater and made a city hall out of it.
After it burned down.
Yeah.
I sense a theme emerging here.
Yeah.
Took the old firehouse. Took the old firehouse and turned it into a low-cost housing after it burned down.
There you go. I'm just concerned about trampling on somebody's individual rights, and somebody wanted to remodel the property, want to build the property up, or even tear it down and build a new one, and then some neighbor comes up, "Oh no, that's a historical building. You better not touch it." And away we go. And there isn't anything clear that says, "Well, no, only to this extent."
At the risk of being practical, I would suggest that we just leave these policies as they are and not fool with them at the moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that's 3.
Anything more on page 6? Page 7.
Program 27A. And this was written actually before right before we adopted it. No, right after we adopted it. We did purchase a city hall. So I'm just wondering if we should strike City Hall there, because we are going to remodel it, and I don't see us moving in 22 years.
I hope not.
I sense that we will strike City Hall.
Certainly not in the next 10 to 11.
And then, looking at it, I mean, but community center, afterwards, the Mission Blue was built, and I think it was referring to that. Is there any other things you're thinking about, I'm talking to the rest of the council here about other community centers possibly, or
What's a recreation center?
Well, I guess, community gymnasium.
Yeah, it's
Gymnasium.
possible, yeah.
okay.
Community center is possible.
How about police station, because that's going to be upgraded also? I mean, or you think looking outward, you're going to have a
It's conceivable, I think.
Yeah, the
with
substation.
advanced development, yeah, substation.
Okay, all right. Okay, so just strike City Hall.
Anything else on this page?
Steve, I'm sorry, I neglected to mention something on page 6, if I may. I know you like to go forward, but
I always do like to go forward.
yes, I appreciate going back one step. Okay, on page 6, the very top, program 22G, it talks about cellular phone towers. Program 22G, the last, I think probably would be best to call it communication towers versus just cellular.
Like a radio antenna.
Exactly.
Any problem with that?
There may also be federal preemption issues.
Right.
For cell
phone
towers?
Yes.
So the suggestion was to change from cell phone to communication?
Thank you.
All right, now we're moving on to page 8. Any comments on page 8?
I just had a wording change to program 27C, moving community center to the after 4, so that it would read study alternatives for community center building remodeling and landscape treatments in conjunction with design guidelines. So I removed the words to upgrade the. It was just a stylistic change.
Everybody okay with that?
And the design guidelines we have, right? I looked at item 30A, and we talked about Livingston Marsh and other designated aquatic areas, bayfront. And then it talks about with the California Department of Fish and Game. Now, there are many other agencies that would be involved. So, do we want to list them all, or just drop everything on Fish and Game? Who'll probably tell us, no, sorry, that's water board, not mine.
We could make a general reference
Yeah,
to
general.
agencies.
Would you mind?
Is that what
Yeah.
you, yeah, that's what you're thinking.
I also had a change on program 29B, and it's again just a language change. It doesn't change the meaning at all. It's to reverse the order of percentage and a minimum, and then to include open space and open areas for clarity. So it would read, adopt new zoning regulations as necessary with specific qualifying requirements for open areas and lot coverage, and for minimum percentage open space / open area standards for all planned development districts. All right.
Will you pass that language on? So,
Sure.
anything else on page 8?
I have 29A, I have a proposed addition. It says, review the setback, lot coverage, and landscape requirements in the zoning ordinance to assure adequate open areas in the development pattern. And then I wanted to add that could and or should be contiguous with other open areas. Say an example would be like Leveson area. It like to see a green belt, and that actually is in the open space plan. You have a green belt that actually connects to the mountain, to the marsh, that type of thing. And that's why I put that could and or should. It doesn't necessarily. Some cases it may not fit, but where it fits, we should have it connect.
Any reactions to that suggestion?
Okay.
Will you give that language to staff, please?
That
Clark?
could or
Okay.
should be contiguous. Exactly.
Yeah, that it would read pattern that could and or should be contiguous with other open areas.
Steve, just punctuation suggestion. If it says review the same item, it says review the setback, comma, lot coverage. Do we need a comma and? Right after lot coverage, comma?
I'm sorry, which one is this?
29A. Under 29A, it says review the setback, comma, lot coverage. Does it need a comma there?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Go on to page 9,
31B, Mr. Mayor.
31B.
B is a boy.
Okay.
Consider develop hillside development standards that retain steep slopes as open spaces. What does that mean?
Through the chair, the wording is just to put develop instead of consider, of course, so this has always been in there. I think there's, as a result of experiences with projects, I can think the Ing project, the 8 Thomas project, various projects over time has elevated, in the commission's mind, a desire to see that we develop hillside development standards that do that, amend the ordinance to do that, rather than just consider it, because it's been under consideration since the plan was adopted, and the commission wanted to see us actually do that in the next plan horizon of 22 years.
I propose we change the word develop to establish hillside development standards that retain
I think that's a
agree.
good word.
And on 31A, proposing that also to establish a setback requirement to achieve separation from areas of wildland fire hazard, not consider, but establish it. Yeah. That's on 31A.
I hear agreement on that. Anything else on this page?
I had an idea that pedestrian facilities should be part of new projects in policy 32 somewhere. This is talking about respecting the historic pattern of open areas in central Brisbane and retain this character in conjunction with the rehabilitation of existing structures when consistent with good planning and safety practices. I was wondering if that fits here, if in any of these programs. It talks about undergrounding utilities. It talks about parking and setback requirements. Does providing pedestrian facilities fit in here?
I think it
so,
would.
yeah, kind of.
Then I'd like to
think it
see
would.
that included somehow. I don't have any language for you, but
Program 32E.
Well, let's let staff do the language, but,
So
okay?
that'd be program 32E is what.
Right.
Yeah.
Program 32E.
Anything else on page 9? Page 10. Comments, criticisms?
no.
Moving on to page 11. Last page.
I just had a question on the last two. Policy 37, we're deleting it, and why is that?
Whoa. Because that would be bringing the Brisbane Acres into compliance. Right? We don't.
Recorded subdivisions. I don't know. We haven't. Hal, do you have any thoughts on that?
You don't need 37A because that's already a requirement of the zoning ordinance.
Maybe that's it.
We're not going to allow approval. We have a general regulation that says you cannot get a development approval on a lot that, if it's not a lot of record. So if it's unrecorded, by definition, it's not a lot of record.
But the policy is on an ongoing basis, bring unrecorded subdivisions in compliance with the subdivision map at its city standards, and they would have to comply with that, right, in order to do
Well, quite frankly, we have no incentive to do that.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I know.
So is there a reason to retain policy 37?
I don't think so.
Well,
We own most of
37A.
those now anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
the
but-
difference
but you
between
still
now and
need-
when this was adopted is that the city has since acquired a good chunk of that real estate up there.
But you still need policy, you still need program 37A. You don't need policy 37 so much, right?
37A is already
In
a
an ordinance.
legal requirement that
Oh, so you don't need it in the general plan?
we're not going to grant any development approval for something that is not a lot of record.
But do you need to say that in the general plan?
No.
Okay.
because
So we really don't need any policy 37 or 37A.
Yeah, the recommendation is to delete.
Delete, okay. Everybody agreed on delete?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear on it because the way it sounded is that Brisbane, the city's doing that, but really it's, yeah,
Well, I guess the answer is it's already implemented as part of our zoning.
part of the document.
I believe we've come to the end of our assignment. Very good.
Great job.
Do you wish to orally communicate?
I would telepathically if I could. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dana Dilworth. In the attachments that were on the internet, it included attachment A and had some of the preliminary discussions of the lead-ins to different chapters. And one of the things I had noticed is that on the conservation chapter, you had changed some language to include conservation of the mountain, but not the bay. And I just don't know when you're going to go back to that language, but would like you to reconsider when you're speaking of conservation to speak in terms of a whole environment rather than for segments of the environment. I had comments on two of the things that you had worked on earlier today. 15.4, where you were talking about incorporation of pedestrian amenities. I think you should include bridges. And the kinds of bridges that I'm thinking of are ones that people do in colder climates, where you put bridges between two buildings. Like in Minnesota, you might have your bridges between two buildings at the second floor, the fifth floor, and the 10th floor. And another pedestrian amenity you might want to consider is solar-covered walkways. When the design for the Slough Estates came about, you have 5 buildings that are somewhat disconnected, and by putting a photovoltaic walkway, you get an opportunity to use it for energy consumption, and you also protect people from the sun, from skin injuries. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that something that I've been working on that is going to be a summit about remediation issues on June 2nd. It's an all-day seminar, 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the evening at the Golden Gate University. And in the documents you had tonight, it basically said that all of the background reports have been done. And I am feeling that just looking at global warming, if this general plan is supposed to last for 23 years, I think we need to look at the global warming issues with just a little bit greater intensity. And, that's kind of how this global warming summit came about. This particular one will deal with toxins that have been left in bay zone and whether we should rethink our landfill strategies because of the future of having more water getting into our landfills, either from above, from rain, or from the sides, they're talking vertically or horizontally, through groundwater and storm surges. So those are the kinds of things I think that if we're just adding on something of 10 years ago that we may not have in the total mix, and I hope that we look at some of these, the language in these, to include the conservation parts of it. And actually, the other one that I was going to mention was 22E, where you talk about performance standards for lighting and how to keep the glare down. An alternative that could be lights out at night. It could be, there's a whole new group of people inventing lights. Both the compact fluorescent, plus there will probably be a whole nother generation of lights in the future. And so those are things I hope we can somehow incorporate into our new general plan. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Before we close, though, do we have a problem with putting bridges and solar covered walkways in program 15.4 on the pedestrian amenities? I would certainly entertain it. What number is it? 15.4, new policy.
I'm not sure. A solar panel is a nice feature. I'm not sure it's necessarily a pedestrian amenity, but I mean, I don't have any issue with bridges being listed. I mean, these are all examples.
Yeah.
And it's fine to list out more examples. The PV sounds more like an energy issue.
Well, I mean, if it fit and provided a walkway that, provides
It's
energy.
a covering for a walkway.
Yeah, but it's like a dual thing. I kind of like the concept. It's really like green buildings. So I'm just, not that it's enforceable. It's just to encourage you. I'm subtly exposed. So. And how about the other suggestion on lighting? Maybe give that to staff on 22E. About types of lighting. And I'm not really sure all that Dana said, but I mean, the types of lighting on 22E. It says establish clear and defined performance standards to address light and glare, the treatment of roofs, and the screening of mechanical equipment. And I think she was referring to types of lights that are used.
Yeah, and I think this really is more of an overarching policy, saying that you should address that. You should consider the lights out, I suppose, as a, as one way to address that. But this is just giving direction to establish clear and defined performance standards. It's not listing out the performance standards, which is kind of what I heard from Dana.
Okay. And I guess the question is, or the answer to the conservation element, I didn't get to cut it that one last week, but yeah, we're going to be looking at it again at some point before it's finalized. So.
And there is a statement. I mean, the statement that we had in our package is that there is stewardship of the mountain and bay. So her issue was, are we going to address the bay? What we changed it to was to say there is stewardship of the mountain and bay.
Oh, okay.
So that is in there.
All in favor of the motion to adjourn? Aye. Thank you.
Honey?
you.